This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And good morning, Kentucky. I'm your host, Bob Scott. It's Monday, June the 23rd, and you're tuned into Kentucky's Voice, where common sense meets conviction, and the issues that matter to our state and our nation come front and center. If you want to join in today's discussion, and I strongly recommend that you do, you can text us at 502-571-0970. Again, that text line number is 502-571-0970. And of course, the big news, and I mean huge news, over the weekend was the U.S. involvement of the bombing strike on Iran. Please play clip one.
The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. For the entirety of his time in office, President Trump has consistently stated for over 10 years that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. Full stop. Thanks to President Trump's bold and visionary leadership and his commitment to peace through strength, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated.
A lot of very powerful and important things that were shared by Secretary Hegseth in that statement. One of them being very careful to say that the Iranian people and troops were not targeted, just the nuclear facilities. Today, we are honored to welcome a frequent guest whose service and insight speaks volumes. It is going to be Kentucky State Senator and retired Navy SEAL Aaron Reed. Senator Reed joins us to discuss some of the most urgent and complex challenges facing our country right now. And we'll dive into, on today's program, the Iranian nuclear strike, strength, strategy, and constitutional authority. A topic that is as much about America's resolve as it is about our readiness. We'll also discuss how Iranian sleeper cells and the Biden border crisis are connected. And finally, we'll focus on what you, the Patriots of Kentucky, can do to stay vigilant in these uncertain times. This is a conversation that you absolutely don't want to miss. If you have someone that is obviously following what's going on, I would encourage you to call them and tell them to join in today's program. I want you to grab a cup of coffee, turn up the volume, and let's get to the conversation. Aaron, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. Reports are coming in that Iran's nuclear facilities were hit in a very precision strike. Some are calling it one of the most consequential military actions in years. In fact, before we get in deeper into our discussion, I do have another short clip I want to share from Scott Jennings, Louisville native Scott Jennings, and CNN commentator. Please play clip number 5.
About how they were indirect threat and how the U.S. needed to respond without congressional approval. But as of right now, I have not seen that.
You're arguing that after 46 years of the Iranian regime killing Americans, threatening Americans, saying over and over and over again, death to America, that maybe they were just, didn't mean it, that they're fiery but mostly peaceful Iranian butchers? I mean, I don't understand. This is a righteous struggle.
But what you have...
Yeah, always an interesting conversation from CNN, especially when Scott Jennings is involved. He is, I think, the lone voice of reason on that network. Aaron, again, brother, I just can't tell you. In fact, folks, everybody, so you know this, when all this came down, the very first thing I thought of, I got to get Aaron Reed on our program today. There is no one more authoritative that gets it and understands what's going on than Aaron Reed as far as matters like this. And again, Aaron, what is your take? And again, welcome to the show, brother. And what's your take as to what's going on right now?
Hey, thanks, Bob. You know, I'll tell you this, if the reports are accurate and if this strike took out Iran's key nuclear sites, then it was the right move. Iran has been the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. You know, they've been threatening the U.S., Israel, and the free world for decades. They don't respond to handshakes. They really only respond to strength. And under President Trump, we saw what real deterrence looks like. He walked away from the disastrous Iran deal, applied maximum pressure, and took out Soleimani, the most dangerous terrorist in the region. These strikes, whether ordered now or rooted in Trump-era intel and strategy, show the kind of resolve we need to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know I've been followed, obviously, a lot of Fox's coverage, and Catherine Herridge said it's probably the most under wraps, I guess, intel event that she has seen. And it tells me that Secretary Hegseth and the other generals and the folks that put this together did a masterful job. As far as doing what they needed to do and what needed to happen. And the fact of the matter is, it always gripes me when people want to almost rush to the defense of Iran. They're not, and I'm talking about the leadership. The Persian people, the Iranian people, generally speaking, are very good folks. But the leadership, as you pointed out, and really has been going on for over 40 years. There's been hundreds, if not thousands, of American lives that have been lost as a result of their actions. And what do you have to say, about some of this controversy, as there always is, about presidential authority? We're hearing that a lot, coming up right now, that President Trump didn't have the authority to do this. But everything I've seen and read and understand, and the fact he's not the only president that has done this, in the last 40 years. There's been several others, both Democrat and Republican. Some critics are asking if the president even has power to carry out such a strike without congressional approval, including at least some of our representatives from this state. What does the Constitution say about that?
Well, that's a great question. It's important we get this right. Under Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That authority gives him the power to respond quickly to imminent threats, protect American lives, and execute limited military operations without waiting for Congress. This isn't new. Presidents from Ronald Reagan in Libya to Barack Obama against Osama bin Laden, they've used this same authority. Trump himself used it in the Soleimani strike. The key difference is intent and scale. These are not declarations of war. They are targeted actions in defense of our nation and our allies.
So, Aaron, in other words, the president doesn't have to ask, if I get this right, permission to protect Americans or stop a terror threat.
Exactly. If you've got a ticking time bomb, literally or figuratively, you don't wait around for committee debate. You have to act. And the American people should want that kind of decisive leadership. What's frustrating is that when Trump acted, he was called a warmonger. But in reality, he kept us out of war through deterrence.
Yeah.
Strength avoids war. Weakness invites it. Biden's soft approach has emboldened Iran, China, and Russia. Trump's strength kept our enemies guessing and our allies reassured.
Wow, yeah, and I say amen to that. So what do you think this latest strike accomplishes in terms of our national security?
Well, if it disabled Iran's nuclear capability, even temporarily, it buys us time and leverage. And more importantly, it tells Iran and the world that the United States, when led by real leadership, won't tolerate a nuclear threat from radical regimes. Iran isn't just Israel's problem. A nuclear Iran is a threat to every American city, and we can't afford to pay or play nice when evil men are building weapons of mass destruction. Trump understood that, and the world respected it.
You know, one of the main reasons there were many, but that I voted for and strongly supported President Trump was, and I know you feel the same way. You've actually got a child serving in the military, as do I. You know, both of our sons are wearing the colors of our nation and staying on the front line, and I think that is very important for Americans to understand, because I know there's been some bannering back and forth among the Make America Great group, the concerns that this is going to lead to a wider conflict, which has happened, you know, before. And I think we have to give the president a chance and see what's going to transpire as we move forward. And I do feel personally we're in great hands. Aaron, do you have any final thoughts on this segment as to what Americans should take away from all of this?
Yeah, they should take away that we need strong leadership that acts with constitutional authority, moral clarity, and fearless resolve. President Trump gave us that. And when he did, our enemies backed down and our allies stood tall. The world is safer when America is strong, and America is strong when it has leaders who don't flinch.
Yeah, you know, Aaron, we're coming up on the closing of this segment. I couldn't agree more. You know, in fact, folks, when we come back, we'll talk about the nation of Israel and why we must always stand with her, not just politically, but biblically. And I know there's some thoughts about that too. You are listening to Kentucky's Voice. Stay with us. We will be right back with an incredible segment 2.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And we are back with Senator Aaron Reed, our good friend here on Kentucky's Voice. We are so appreciative to have you, the listener, joining us today. Our text line number is 502-571-0970. Again, that text line number is 502-571-0970. We do invite your texts so you can be a part of the program. You know, I know most of my listeners have been very outspoken about their support of this strike, but there are some that aren't. Either way, we want to hear from you. Senator Reed, what are your thoughts, you know, as far as we are moving forward? We've obviously made the strike. It's happened. I think President Trump's statements have been pretty clear. You know, his feelings for that. We know Israel itself has been about the only democracy in the Middle East that has supported the United States. And there's a lot of feelings both ways, you know, candidly, about Israel and their intentions. Personally, I had some concerns, the fact that they did it initially without apparently the full backing of the United States, but nonetheless, they did it. You know, and for me, you know, as far as I coming to grips with this, it came to I actually came to grips with the idea that we can't allow you know, essentially Iran, a very militant nation that has been backing enemies of this country and also actually being involved in strikes that have taken out thousands of people, you know, through the years. And I know you have a very unique experience. You are first and foremost a Christian. You're a patriot. You're American. You're involved in serving in government. Right now, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of war. I do feel that you bring a very unique perspective to this. And tell me a little bit about your thoughts about what I just shared.
Yeah. So, you know, I know this has become a very volatile question, and people are really having a hard time wrapping their heads around it. But for me, and I know for millions of Christians and patriots across this country, support for Israel isn't political. it's biblical. Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So that's a promise from God to Abraham, and it still stands today. Israel is God's chosen nation, and America has been blessed in large part because we've stood with her. Every time we weaken that support, whether by funding our enemies or sitting on the sidelines, we see the consequences play out in chaos, war, and instability.
Yeah, and in that region, since biblical times, is well noted for there always being some sort of conflict, that's going on. And for a time such as this, we do need steady leadership. And I thank God that we have President Trump in office that's pulling the strings, as opposed to the former administration, which, quite frankly, as news is coming out more and more about it, you don't know who was pulling the strings in the Biden administration. I sure don't think it was him. Let's talk a little bit about President Trump, Aaron. His policies toward Israel were absolutely historic. What basically stood out most to you?
Well, Trump has been the most pro-Israel president in American history, period. He did what others promised, but really never delivered. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing it as the rightful capital of Israel. He recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is critical to their security. He brokered the Abraham Accords, historic peace deals between Israel and several Arab nations. He didn't just say he stood with Israel, he actually proved it. And the result was more peace, not less. And that's the power of principled leadership.
Yeah, and if you're just joining in today's program, I'm very fortunate and blessed to have a good friend, Aaron Reed, State Senator Aaron Reed, former Navy SEAL, on the program today. And again, if you'd like to join in the discussion, our text line number, if you have a comment or just a thought that one way or the other, you can text us at 502-571-0970. Again, that phone number is 502-571-0970. Aaron, now compare that to what we're seeing as far as the Biden administration. You were talking about what happened, as far as what Trump actually did do.
Sure.
And that's the thing I love about President Trump. When he says something, he means it. And there's no beating around the bush.
Whole world knows that now.
Yes, yeah. So, if you don't mind, draw a comparison to the Biden administration. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Under Biden, it's been, it was one misstep after another. We saw, funding restored to Palestinian groups with ties to terror. We saw, a White House that can't even decide if Israel has the right to defend itself when rockets are raining down on their cities. This kind of weak double-speak diplomacy doesn't really bring peace. It brings bloodshed, and it sends a dangerous message to Iran and its proxies. America won't interfere. That's unacceptable.
Yeah, and Senator, for those listening who maybe don't follow foreign policy very closely, why should the average American care so much about Israel?
Because Israel is the front line in the fight against terrorism and tyranny. They're our eyes and ears in the most dangerous region on earth. They provide vital intel. They innovate in defense technology. That's a big one. They're a democratic stronghold surrounded by radical regimes that want to wipe them off the map. But it's more than strategy. When we stand with Israel, we're standing with faith, family, and freedom. We're standing against the kind of hatred that killed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust and still wants to finish the job. This is about choosing righteousness over radicalism. It's about honoring our covenant, both spiritually and as a global leader.
Yeah, and Aaron, what do you have to say specifically to Christians, about this issue?
I'd say don't get distracted. Don't get political. You have to get biblical on this one. We're called as a nation to support Israel, not because they're perfect. We know that's not the case,
Right.
but because they're God's people and God's plan still runs through them. If we want to be a nation blessed by God, then we must never turn our back on Israel. And President Trump understood that. And I believe that's part of why America was stronger under his leadership and is stronger, because we are in alignment with God's word. I mean, you should see he gave a great prayer, battle prayer before in the war room there, and then he made it absolutely clear that he loves God and thanks God for the success.
And in his statement to the American public at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, he honored God in that statement. And those are very powerful words, Aaron. When we come back, we're going to talk about something that hits a little closer to home. What kind of threats we may be facing right here in America from Iran and other terrorist networks, and how President Trump's border policies has made us safer. Stay with us on Kentucky's Voice. We'll be right back. Our text line number again, if you want to join in today's program, is 502-571-0970. Again, that text line number is 502-571-0970.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm here with Senator Aaron Reed. Just so blessed to have him on the program today. We've been obviously talking about the big strike that happened Saturday on Iran. America does support and has supported Israel. And now, Aaron, we want to bring it a little closer to home. Before we get that, too, I do want to invite, if you're just tuning in, again, we're blessed to have Kentucky State Senator Aaron Reed, one of the most authoritative folks in our state, especially when it comes to dealing with military affairs. Why is he so authoritative? Well, I'll answer that question. He was involved in over 300 missions when he was a SEAL, also fought in the Battle of Fallujah, as well as a Navy SEAL sniper. So if there's anybody that understands what it's like to bring the fight to terrorists, it is Senator Reed. And again, Aaron, we are very pleased to have you on. And if you'd like to text a question in, our text line number is 502-571-0970. Again, that phone number is 502-571-0970. We've talked often about national security risks. We want to talk extensively. And I know just about every time I've had you on this program, Aaron, we have brought up with you and other guests that I've had on. I've been blessed to have a nationally known author and former Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann on the program to discuss this. As well as my good personal friend, Colonel Glenn Kelly, who was actually involved, first boots on the ground, back in the initial invasion of Iraq many, many moons ago. And so these are all guys that gets it, and they understand, the ins and outs of warfare like you do. And what we're dealing with. And it's interesting, before President Trump even got elected, I know Scott Mann on my program even mentioned to me he had a recent meeting down in Florida in which he had 1,000 former Spec Ops guys, from SEALs to Rangers, to Green Beret type folks in that meeting. And he asked a simple question of all of them. He said, how many of you all feel that the United States is going to be hit relatively soon with some kind of terrorist activity threat, and it'll be major? He said that every single hand in that room went up. And again, let's frame this. Let's keep in mind this was back when open border Joe Biden was letting anybody and their brother come into our country. Had absolutely no problems with that. And they estimate that at least, minimally, at least 1,000 enemy combatants that are, when I say enemy combatants, I'm talking about trained terrorists that have come in through our borders because of this policy. And it's a scary thing. I do have a clip also to reinforce what I'm saying. It's CIA targeter. She's also well-known author as well, and had worked for the CIA, Sarah Adams, that I want to share as well. Please play clip 4.
One thing that is really important for the public to be aware of, and the terrorists did this in during the Israel attacks, is they're going to target first responders, and they want to make it so first responders can't get to the victims, right? So you have to kind of think about, okay, what if there's no response to where I am for many, many hours, right? Like, how can I sustain myself? Can I do basic medical? Now, then if you're a first responder, a lot of our law enforcement are trained on active shooter, which is one shooter. These terrorists trained in 5 to 7, 8 to 10 man teams. So if you're not having drills where there's multiple shooters in multiple parts of your city and training and practicing that way, right, you're not going to be prepared and you're going to be shocked. And then the last part is, which Americans aren't prepared for at all, is there's going to be suicide bombings involved in this plot. A lot of them will be focused on federal buildings, but then there's a huge aviation plot again that involves suicide vests. Our TSA isn't taking this seriously. They haven't improved airport security. So the millimeter wave scanners stop the suicide vest. You cannot walk through it. There's been no effort to put more people through those scanners, so you can walk through like a magnetometer just fine, get on an airplane with one of these vests. So until our government starts also taking this plot seriously, we're in a pretty bad situation.
Yeah, her last statement especially was chilling, or really all of everything she said is chilling, and these are tactics that you as a Navy SEAL sniper saw time and time and time again, from the suicide vests to where they would do an attack and then wait for the first responders to come in and then do another bigger attack, to take them out, to do as much damage as they possibly can. And I'm still, in my mind, not convinced, and she's not. She knows a lot more than I do. That we're quite ready for this. As far as a nation is concerned. And the thing I want to emphasize, folks, they're here. They were here primarily because of the former regime, the Joe Biden regime, let them come in the front door. If you were, or you could make an argument, the back door. So they're here. We are in now a semi-state of war, even though nothing has been declared. It was more of a surgical, as we talked about last segment, this was a surgical procedure to protect America, But what are your thoughts, Senator Reid?
Well, Bob, I'll just reiterate everything you said. I mean, we're the number one on the list as far as hated by that group of people in the world. And my biggest concern is that we have no idea who's in our country right now. President Biden, he allowed millions of people to cross into the U.S. illegally, including individuals from nations hostile to America, like Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. And make no mistake, Iran is smart. They don't just build bombs, they build networks.
Yes.
The Qud Force, the IRGC, they've operated terror cells in Latin America for decades. And it doesn't take much for those cells to cross over our border and vanish into American cities. I mean, we're talking about sleeper cells, people who look like students, shopkeepers, Uber drivers, but who are ready. They're trained and waiting for the green light.
Yeah, and that's there's a good reason they call them sleeper cells. Is they are just that. They could be your next door neighbor, and you really don't know them. Do you have any actual evidence that these people are coming through the border right now?
Sure, we do. Just this year, terror watch list individuals have been caught at the border. That's just the ones we caught. Under Biden, 48% of the Iranians arrested at the southern border were released into the U.S. between 2021 and 2024. We've had over, I think, 1.7 million getaways. People who crossed illegally and were never stopped. How many of those are hostile actors? We don't know.
Yeah.
It's almost like it was by design. But let me tell you, when I was overseas, we always assumed the enemy was watching, waiting, and looking for our weak spots. So right now, our border is still the biggest weak spot in American defense.
Yeah, amen to that. And some people might hear this and say, that sounds like fear mongering. We hear that said all the time, especially from those on the left. Is it really fear mongering? What do you have to say about that?
I'm hearing it a lot, on several different angles. And I would say it's not fear, it's awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I've been in hundreds of firefights. I've faced real evil. And this isn't a theory to me. Iran is a threat. Radical Islam is a threat. Open borders gives our enemies opportunities, and they're going to take it. This is exactly how 9/11 happened. We ignored the red flags. We got comfortable. We assumed our oceans would protect us like we have for years. And 3,000 Americans paid the price. If we don't learn from history, we're going to repeat it.
I guess, how would President Trump, have handled this a little bit differently? I'm assuming we already know the guy is more than proactive as far as the way he attacks and is laser focused on things. What are your thoughts?
I think he already has, and he will keep on. But Trump, he built the wall. We still need some more. He shut down catch and release. He required foreign nationals to stay in Mexico while seeking asylum. He treated border security like national security, because it is. And, compare that to today. We've got ICE agents told to stand down. In the past, Border Patrol completely overwhelmed, and people being flown into the interior of the country with no vetting. That was crazy.
Yeah, really was.
It's not compassion, that's chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was intended in its own right. And, let's drill it down on this. What should local and state governments, like here in Kentucky, be doing to prepare for these kind of threats?
We need to take it seriously at every level. That means investing in local law enforcement. It's a good idea to partner with our Homeland Security for real-time intelligence and training our first responders to recognize the signs of radicalization. We also need legislators who aren't afraid to call out this border crisis for what it is and support, what President Trump has going on. National security failure, it has been. And if we don't deal with it now, it ain't going away. We're going to deal with it later.
Yeah, and that is 100% the truth. It's really important that every American listening to this and become more vigilant than you've ever been. Powerful words from Senator Reed. When we come back, we'll wrap up with a final charge to our listeners: how to stay vigilant, protect your family, and live boldly in a time of uncertainty. Stay with us. We're here on Kentucky's Voice.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Now, welcome back to our final segment of Kentucky's Voice. You can still get on today's program if you want to text us a question. That number is 502-571-0970. Again, 502-571-0970. If you have a question or a comment for Senator Aaron Reed, who is joining us today. Aaron, we've covered a lot, as far as foreign threats, Israel, the border, and what really is at stake right now. And as we close out today, I want to talk to you directly as a SEAL, a father, a man of faith. What can everyday Americans be doing right now to protect their families and defend their communities?
It's always a good question. And I'll say this first. Panic solves nothing, but preparation does. Every patriot listening today has a role. You don't need to be in uniform to be on mission. You're a parent, you're a church leader, a teacher, and then you're already in the fight. Here's what I tell people: know what's normal so that you can spot what's not. Situational awareness, head on a swivel, looking around, always being observant. Watch how people act. Look for unintended bags, bags laying around that look suspicious behavior. Listen, here's a big one. My wife tells me this all the time. Listen to your gut. She's always getting these gut feelings. And, I listen to them because they've always turned out to be something to that.
Well, I know your wife well, and I will say, gentlemen, it's always good to listen to your wives. My wife, Caroline, has those same kind of gut feelings, and she's usually right on the money. We know that also over the weekend there was an attempted terrible attack up in Michigan on a church up there. It was averted mainly because church security and other folks were paying attention, and they were being vigilant. I have a clip I want to play from the police chief up in Michigan, and then after the clip, Aaron, I'd like to get your thoughts about it. Please play, I believe it's clip 4.
Officers arrived and determined that the suspect arrived at the church and began to drive recklessly, drawing the attention of church staff members. The suspect exited his vehicle wearing a tactical vest, armed with a long gun and a handgun. He approached the church building and began firing his weapon. Several staff members from the church approached the gunman. A parishioner struck the gunman with his vehicle as the gunman shot the vehicle repeatedly. At least 2 staff members shot the gunman, causing fatal wounds. 1 staff member was shot once in the leg by the suspect. The church staff members do not wish to be identified at this point. The Wayne Police Department is still investigating this incident with the assistance of multiple local, state, and federal partners. We are grateful for the heroic actions of the church's staff members, who undoubtedly saved many lives and prevented a large-scale mass shooting. I would add that the church parishioners and staff members were trained in responding to emergency situations, which also saved lives. The gunman is a 31-year-old white male from Romulus. His motivations are unknown, but at this point it appears he was suffering from a mental health crisis.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Does not appear to be, at least right now, terrorist related, but it is terrorism. I don't care if it's someone from overseas or someone here locally. Apparently, he did have some kind of mental conditions that perhaps led up to this. But the key takeaway was the vigilance of staff that were trained, security staff at the church. And also, I don't know if you caught it, but there was just another parishioner, someone that belonged to the church, in his vehicle, saw what was going on and took quick action with his vehicle, and that's a pretty good weapon, went and took him down and put himself or herself, and I think it was a man, in harm's way, to actually take this guy down, and then the security team did what they needed to do to make sure he was not going to get off any more rounds. But he came in loaded for bear. From everything that I've heard, he was well armed with every kind of automatic weapon you can imagine. Was intent on doing much damage and harm to the folks of that church. And you've trained SEALs, Aaron. I mean, and you are a trained SEAL, who has fought in combat. And how do you translate that mindset into something the average person can use?
That's a good question. The situation's heartbreaking. We have to remember that evil is a lion roaming around seeking who it will devour. And there's a war on Christians, and that's part of it. And that hits home for me because I'm not just a senator and a SEAL. I'm a believer.
Yeah.
I'm part of a small church here in Kentucky, and my wife and I raise our kids there. My wife's a preacher's kid, so it's a whole other story there. But what happened in Michigan it's just plain evil, plain and simple. And while we pray for the victims, we also have to act. Every church in America should have a safety plan. A trained security team, not just greeters with walkie-talkies, but people who are mentally and physically prepared to defend their folks. Because as you can see, like that, game time, that's how it works. People ask me all the time, I don't know if I could shoot somebody. I'm like, well, how do you know? I'm like, I promise you, when the time comes, you will know. And you will not be able to hesitate because you won't be able to do it fast enough.
Yeah, and that's an important statement. Is being trained, and then being willing to commit. In a situation like that. And we've heard down through the years of several stories. I know there was one in Texas several years back in which a guy had come in and actually had killed one or two people of the church. But it was one of the security team members that actually took him out, long shot, with a handgun.
I saw that.
Yeah, it was a headshot, and took him out, and and it's heartening to hear that there are Americans willing to step up and do what needs to be done.
They had a team. They were organized. They had a communications plan in case of emergency, and above all, the conviction that it's not unchristian to protect your people. It's biblical.
Yes.
Look at Nehemiah. He built the wall with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. And that's how we need to build our churches today.
Yes. No, that's
in working.
That's an excellent analogy, Aaron, because you're exactly right about that. It's one of my favorite scriptures. A trowel in one hand as they're building the wall, and a sword in the other, ready to take on anybody that would come and try to attack them. I know my father-in-law. He's a member of his security team at his church. In fact, I think he leads it. And he's just a common everyday guy. But let me tell you, like you wouldn't want to roll into his church because he's there to, as they say, serve and protect. How do we keep from falling into fear while staying alert?
Well, that's where fear or where faith comes in. Because of fear, Bob. I think it's 2 Timothy 1:7 says.
One of my favorite scriptures, by the way.
Okay, so God has not given us a spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. Because fear paralyzes, but faith, it activates. You walk boldly, not because you know what's coming, but because you know who walks with you. I say that for several things in my life. I've been shot at, blown up, ambushed, and I was never alone. Thank God. He was always with me in the fight. He was with you too. That's not just comfort. It's your command center, and faith gives you clarity in chaos. People are always wondering, why are you so calm? I try to tell them, calmness is contagious, so I'm trying to spread the love there.
No, that's good. I've heard many stories from you, but I do love the one where you In fact, I think this happened to you several times where it's like everything slows down around you when you're in combat. And again, for those of you just joining in, he's been in over at least 300 combat situations where he could have lost his life. But he remained calm in that situation, and he was prayed up, had a lot of people praying for him in the process. And I do firmly believe that the angels were there to surround you and keep you safe, in that situation. Let's talk a little bit about the local and what should folks here in Kentucky be doing right now in their communities?
I would say simply getting involved. Support your sheriff's department. Go to school board meetings. Know your neighbors is a big one. Know your neighbors. So many people have forgotten how to go talk to people face to face. Get out of the text and the Facebook and all that. And not that I know that's part of our life now, but man, just go talk to people. That's a big one. Start or join get the ball rolling on a church safety team if you don't have one yet. Volunteer with veterans organizations. That's always a big one. There's lots of them out there. Every strong community is built on engaged citizens. We're not powerless. We're just disconnected. So start where you are. You don't need permission to lead. You really just need conviction, and maybe this will be it.
Amen. And final charge, Senator, that I have is, what's your closing message to the great people of Kentucky listening right now?
Man, is it almost over? Golly, this show's
goes fast.
I guess my message would be this. This is your country. Don't sit back. Stand up. Be the dad who prays over his kids. Be the mom.
I like that. Yes. Yes.
Be the teenager who says no to the crowd and yes to Christ. Be the citizen who knows the Constitution and lives like freedom matters. Our enemies don't fear wickedness or weakness. They don't fear it. They exploit it. But if we rise up as families of faith, we become a wall they cannot penetrate. So stay alert, stay strong, stay faithful, and never forget, freedom is worth the fight.
What a way to finish, Senator Aaron Reed. Thank you for your time, your service, and your powerful words. You've heard it here on Kentucky's First, where truth, strength, and leadership in action matters. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time on Kentucky's Voice.